stench hits you first. Not the romantic scent of roses and roasted meat you'd expect, but the overwhelming reek of human waste, unwashed bodies, and rotting food scraps that permeates every stone corridor. Medieval castles weren't the elegant palaces of your imagination. They were overcrowded, dangerous communities where 150 people might be crammed into a single fortress, where children worked as servants from age 7, and where the most luxurious room in the entire castle was often completely empty. Think castles were permanent homes for noble families. Think again. These massive stone fortresses sat largely abandoned for months at a time. The lord and lady treated their castles like medieval hotels, constantly moving their entire household. Beds, tapestries, dishes, even their toilets, from property to property. A castle that housed 150 people one week might contain only a skeleton crew of 12 guards the next. Imagine building a fortress that could hold hundreds, only to use it as temporary accommodation. Here's something that will shock you. Most castle children weren't the pampered offspring of nobles learning courtly manners. They were working servants. Some as young as 7 years old, sent away from their families to learn proper behavior while scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. These weren't orphans or peasant children. They were the sons and daughters of wealthy families, essentially child laborers in fancy clothing. The great hall everyone pictures as the heart of medieval castle life. It was often the only warm room in the entire fortress. Before fireplaces were invented in the mid-medieval period, everyone huddled around a single open fire pit that filled the room with smoke and barely heated anything beyond a few feet away. The lord and lady might have private chambers, but servants slept wherever they could find space, often above the kitchen, where the heat from cooking fires provided the only warmth in the entire castle. But here's what will really blow your mind about medieval castle defense. These supposedly impregnable fortresses were defended by fewer soldiers than a modern shopping mall security team. A typical castle in peacetime might have only 12 soldiers total, fewer people than worked the night shift at your local grocery store. These dozen men were responsible for operating gates, patrolling walls, and defending a fortress that could house hundreds. Only during active sieges would castles pack in more soldiers, sometimes over 1,000, turning the already crowded conditions into a nightmare of human density. The water situation alone would horrify modern health inspectors. Most castles drew their water from wells that were frequently contaminated by the very waste disposal systems built into the castle walls. The garderobes, medieval toilets, were essentially holes in the wall that dropped waste directly into the moat or surrounding ditches. During dry seasons, this created conditions that would guarantee disease outbreaks by modern standards. Yet somehow, these communities not only survived but thrived for centuries. The economic reality is equally shocking. A single feast in the Great Hall could cost more than most peasant families earned in an entire year. Yet the same lord who hosted such extravagant displays might be months behind on paying his soldiers and servants. The castle's wealth existed primarily on paper, in the form of land ownership and feudal obligations, while actual cash was chronically scarce. Lords regularly borrowed money from their own servants, creating a complex web of financial relationships that turned the entire social hierarchy upside down. The sleeping arrangements would make modern hotel guests revolt in horror. Privacy was a luxury that simply didn't exist for most castle inhabitants. Servants slept in communal rooms where 20 or 30 people might share a single space, often sleeping 2 or 3 to a bed for warmth. Even noble children shared beds with siblings and servants, and the concept of a private bedroom was so rare that having one was considered an almost unimaginable luxury. Whether you're listening from New York or London, Tokyo or Sydney, everything you've been taught about medieval castles is about to be turned upside down. The reality of castle life was simultaneously more brutal and more remarkable than any fairy tale. Before we dive into this hidden world of medieval survival, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. This is the story about what really happened inside these stone fortresses, the brutal realities, the surprising humanity, and the incredible resilience of people who created entire communities within walls designed for war. The year is 1348, and you're a travelling merchant approaching Warwick Castle, just as the Black Death begins its deadly sweep across England. Your cart loaded with precious wool and spices. You've travelled for days through muddy roads, sleeping in flea-infested inns, desperate to reach the safety of the castle walls before nightfall. The countryside around you whispers with rumours of plague, of entire villages found empty, of bodies rotting in fields with no one left alive to bury them. As twilight approaches, you spot the castle's towers rising from the landscape like massive stone fingers pointing toward heaven. Relief floods through you. Here is sanctuary, protection, a place where civilization still holds against the chaos spreading across the land. Your horse's hooves echo on the cobblestones as you approach the gatehouse, and you call out to the guards, your voice carrying the urgency of a man who's seen too much death in too few days. But you're not just seeking shelter from disease. You're carrying urgent news about French ships spotted along the coast. Information that could mean the difference between peace and war. The castle's lord needs to hear what you've seen, and you need the protection only thick stone walls can provide. As you draw closer, the massive wooden gates seem to promise safety, warmth, and the ordered world of noble society you've been craving during weeks of dangerous travel. The sound of your approach sets dogs barking in the courtyard beyond. Torches flicker in the gathering darkness, and you can hear voices, lots of them, echoing from within the walls. This isn't the quiet, dignified palace you expected. This is a bustling, noisy community, and you're about to discover that everything you thought you knew about castle life was completely wrong. The massive wooden gates groan open, and you're immediately assaulted by a wall of sound and smell that makes you stagger backward. The courtyard erupts in chaos. Children shrieking as they chase chickens, servants shouting orders over the hammering of metalwork. And somewhere in the distance, what sounds like a full-scale argument between the cook and someone demanding immediate food for unexpected guests. But it's the smell that truly shocks you. Not the pleasant aroma of roasting meat and fresh bread you anticipated, but a complex assault on your senses. The sour stench of the guardrobe, the castle's communal toilet, mixing with wood smoke, unwashed bodies, wet wool, and the sharp bite of vinegar used to mask the smell of food that started to turn. Your merchant's nose, trained to detect the quality of goods, immediately recognizes the underlying scent of decay that permeates everything. The first person you encounter isn't an elegant lady or dignified steward, but a boy who couldn't be more than 8 years old, struggling under the weight of a bucket nearly as large as himself. His clothes mark him as nobility, fine wool and decent boots, but his hands are raw from work, and he's clearly exhausted. This is William, sent here from his family's estate 2 counties away to learn proper manners, which apparently means starting his day before dawn to help in the kitchens. As you lead your horse across the courtyard, you notice the stones beneath your feet are slick with something you don't want to identify. The castle's drainage system, you quickly realize, is barely functional. Water from the upper floors, waste from the garderobes, and runoff from the kitchen all seem to find their way into the courtyard, creating a perpetual state of dampness that explains the mold growing on the lower walls. The noise is overwhelming. Unlike the dignified quiet you expected, this castle sounds like a medieval factory town. The blacksmith's hammer rings against metal. Servants shout instructions across the courtyard, and from somewhere above comes the sound of what might be a lute lesson gone very wrong. This isn't the peaceful, ordered world of romantic imagination. This is a working community where 150 people are trying to live, work, and survive within the confines of stone walls that were never designed for comfort. Your eyes adjust to the torchlight, and you begin to make out the true layout of this medieval community. The castle isn't one building. It's a complex of structures jammed together within the walls, each serving a different function. The stables reek of horse manure and wet straw. The kitchen buildings belch smoke and steam, and the living quarters rise in cramped towers, where privacy is a luxury most inhabitants will never know. As a guard approaches to question your business, you notice his sword is worn, but his stomach is full. A good sign that this castle, unlike some you've visited, actually feeds its people regularly. But his eyes are tired, and you realize he's probably one of only a dozen men responsible for defending this entire complex. The romantic image of countless knights in shining armor begins to crumble as you understand the reality. This fortress depends on a skeleton crew of overworked guards who double as gatekeepers, wall walkers, and general maintenance staff. The great hall doors swing open and warm light spills into the courtyard, along with the sound of voices, laughter, and what might be music. But even from here, you can see that the warmth comes from a single source. A massive fire pit in the center of the room that's filling the space with smoke. The romantic medieval feast of your imagination begins to shift into something more complex. A communal survival strategy where shared warmth and food mean the difference between life and death. The first person you meet inside the Great Hall is Margaret, the castle's head seamstress. Though she's currently bandaging a kitchen servant's burned hand with the same skilled fingers that embroider the Lord's finest clothes. She's maybe 40 years old, with the kind of practical intelligence that keeps a community of 150 people clothed, fed, and functioning. Her husband died 2 winters ago, but she's carved out a position of respect and relative security through her indispensable skills. Margaret came to the castle 15 years ago as part of a marriage alliance between 2 minor noble families. When her husband died in a hunting accident, she could have returned to her family in disgrace, but instead she reinvented herself as the castle's most crucial servant. She knows every secret passage, every weak point in the walls, and more importantly, she knows how to turn raw wool into warm clothing, and how to stretch food supplies when unexpected guests arrive. Her story reveals the complex social mobility possible within castle walls. Margaret now earns more than many knights, commands a workshop of 20 seamstresses, and her advice influences decisions about everything from diplomatic gifts to military preparations. The elaborate tapestries hanging in the Great Hall. Those are her creations, worth more than most people's homes and sought after by nobility across 3 kingdoms. Working beside her is Thomas, the castle's head groom, a man whose knowledge of horses makes him nearly as valuable as a knight. He's been with the Lord's family for 20 years, starting as a stable boy and working his way up through pure competence. Thomas can tell you which horse will go lame before it happens, how to treat colic in the middle of the night, and exactly how much grain you need to keep a war horse battle ready. His loyalty to the Lord isn't based on feudal duty, it's based on mutual respect and the security that comes from being truly needed. Thomas oversees an operation that would impress modern logistics managers. The castle's stables house 40 horses, from massive war horses worth more than entire villages to nimble palfreys used for daily transportation. Each horse requires different feed, different care, and different training depending on its purpose. Thomas manages breeding programs, coordinates with horse traders across the region, and maintains relationships with specialized craftsmen who create saddles, bridles, and the countless other items needed to keep a medieval cavalry force operational. But it's the children who really open your eyes to the complexity of castle life. Young Sarah, at 14, represents the fascinating paradox of medieval childhood. She's the daughter of a wealthy merchant family, sent here to learn the manners and connections that will make her a valuable marriage partner. But Sarah spends her days doing back-breaking work, hauling water, scrubbing floors, and helping in the kitchen, while simultaneously learning to read, write, and manage a household of servants. She's essentially an unpaid intern in the medieval economy, trading her labor for education and social connections. Sarah's daily routine would exhaust most modern teenagers. She rises at dawn to help with breakfast preparation, spends the morning learning needlework and household management from Margaret, dedicates afternoons to reading and writing lessons with Brother Francis, and finishes her day helping serve dinner in the Great Hall. But she's also learning skills that will make her one of the most capable women of her generation: financial management, medical care, diplomatic correspondence, and the complex social navigation required to manage relationships between different social classes. The most surprising person you encounter is Brother Francis, a monk who serves as the castle's physician, teacher, and spiritual advisor. He's one of the few people here who can read and write fluently, and he's created an informal school for the castle's children. But Francis also performs surgery, sets broken bones, and maintains the castle's library of medical texts. His small cell near the chapel contains not only religious books, but also treatises on agriculture, astronomy, and engineering that make him the castle's unofficial technical advisor. Brother Francis represents the intellectual sophistication that existed within medieval castle walls. His education at a monastery library has given him access to knowledge preserved from classical antiquity, combined with cutting-edge medieval innovations in medicine, agriculture, and engineering. He serves as the castle's connection to the broader intellectual world, corresponding with scholars across Europe and ensuring that new discoveries and techniques reach this remote community. But Francis is far more than just a scholar. His medical practice includes everything from treating battlefield wounds to delivering babies, and his success rate would be impressive even by modern standards. He's developed surgical techniques for treating arrow wounds that surpass anything available in most cities. and his understanding of herbal medicine has saved countless lives during epidemic outbreaks. His combination of theoretical knowledge and practical experience makes him one of the most valuable members of the castle community. The dynamics between these people reveal a social structure far more complex than simple feudal hierarchy. Margaret teaches Sarah advanced needlework in exchange for help with heavy lifting. Thomas trains the Lord's son in horsemanship, while the boy helps with stable work. Brother Francis provides medical care for everyone from the Lord's family to the lowest servants, and in return, everyone contributes to maintaining his books and medical supplies. What emerges is a carefully balanced ecosystem of mutual dependence, where everyone's survival depends on everyone else's competence. Margaret's textiles provide trade goods that generate income for the entire castle. Thomas's horses enable military defense and economic transportation. Brother Francis's medical knowledge keeps the workforce healthy and productive. Sarah's education today will enable her to manage similar communities in the future. The social dynamics are far more fluid than you expected. While there's definitely hierarchy, the Lord and Lady have private chambers and eat better food. There's also a practical democracy based on competence. When the castle's well needs repair, the Lord consults with Thomas about organizing labor and with Brother Francis about engineering solutions. When unexpected guests arrive, Margaret becomes the temporary authority on housing and feeding arrangements, regardless of her technically subordinate status. The children in the castle aren't just learning job skills. They're absorbing a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social management that will serve them throughout their lives. They watch Margaret diffuse conflicts between temperamental craftsmen, observe Thomas managing relationships with difficult suppliers, and learn from Brother Francis how to balance competing demands from people with different needs and expectations. But perhaps most remarkably, these people have created genuine community within the confines of a military fortress. Children play together regardless of their parents' status. Servants develop deep friendships that last decades, and everyone shares the same basic concerns about health, safety, and survival. The castle isn't just a building. It's a carefully balanced ecosystem of human relationships that depends on everyone understanding their role and contributing to the common good. Even conflict resolution reveals the sophisticated social skills required for castle life. When tensions arise between different groups, and they do regularly, resolution depends not on imposed authority, but on negotiation, compromise, and the shared understanding that everyone's welfare depends on maintaining community harmony. Margaret might mediate disputes between kitchen staff. Thomas might resolve conflicts between guards and stable workers. And Brother Francis often serves as a neutral party when the tensions threaten to disrupt the entire community. But perhaps the most shocking discovery about medieval castle life is how intensely physical and dangerous the daily routine actually was. Modern people romanticize the idea of castle living, but the reality involved constant exposure to hazards that would terrify contemporary safety inspectors. The stone stairs, worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic, became lethal ice rings during winter months. The narrow spiral staircases that provided defense advantages also created death traps, where a single misstep could send someone tumbling down 30 feet of stone steps. Fire represented a constant, terrifying threat that shaped every aspect of daily life. With open flames providing the only light and heat, and with wooden furnishings, tapestries, and straw floor coverings everywhere. Castle fires could consume entire sections of the fortress within minutes. The castle's residents lived with the knowledge that everything they owned could be reduced to ash in a single night, and fire safety protocols were among the first things children learned upon arrival. The castle's waste management system would horrify modern health officials, but it reveals the ingenious engineering solutions medieval communities developed for seemingly impossible problems. The garderobes weren't just crude toilets. They were carefully designed disposal systems that used gravity, water flow, and strategic positioning to remove waste from living areas as efficiently as possible given available technology. The sophisticated understanding of hygiene and disease prevention demonstrated by these systems shows that medieval people were far more knowledgeable about public health than popular stereotypes suggest. Water management presents an equally complex picture of medieval engineering sophistication. The castle's wells weren't just holes in the ground. They were carefully constructed systems that included filtration methods, backup water sources, and elaborate distribution networks that could supply clean water to hundreds of people even during siege conditions. The knowledge required to maintain these systems was passed down through generations of specialized workers whose expertise was crucial to the castle's survival. The castle's food storage and preservation systems demonstrate technological innovations that wouldn't be out of place in modern survival planning. The cellars aren't just cool storage spaces. They're carefully designed environments that use natural temperature regulation, humidity control, and air circulation to preserve food for months without refrigeration. The smoking houses, salt storage areas, and fermentation chambers represent sophisticated understanding of food chemistry that enabled these communities to survive winter months and siege conditions that would challenge modern supply chains. But the most remarkable aspect of castle engineering is how these medieval communities managed to create comfortable living conditions within structures designed primarily for defense. The ingenious solutions developed for heating, lighting, and ventilation show that castle inhabitants were constantly innovating to improve their quality of life, despite the constraints imposed by military architecture. The heating systems that evolved in later medieval castles represent genuine technological breakthroughs. The development of fireplaces with proper chimneys wasn't just about comfort. It was about creating livable spaces that could support the complex social and economic activities that made castle communities viable. The ability to heat individual rooms meant that specialized activities like textile work, manuscript copying, and metalworking could continue year-round, dramatically increasing the castle's economic productivity. Lighting solutions reveal similar innovation and sophistication. The placement of windows, the design of reflective surfaces, and the strategic use of mirrors and polished metal created lighting systems that maximized available natural light while providing backup illumination for essential activities after dark. The castle's candle-making operation wasn't just about basic illumination. It was about creating a lighting infrastructure that could support complex activities requiring precise vision. The ventilation systems built into castle walls demonstrate understanding of air circulation principles that wouldn't seem primitive to modern engineers. The strategic placement of vents, the design of airflow channels, and the coordination between different levels of the castle created environments where hundreds of people could live and work without succumbing to the respiratory diseases that killed inhabitants of less well-designed buildings. Even the castle's acoustics were carefully planned to serve both practical and social functions. The Great Hall's design amplified music and speech, making it possible to entertain large groups and conduct official business effectively. But the same acoustic principles that made public gatherings successful also provided privacy for confidential conversations in smaller chambers, enabling the complex diplomatic and business negotiations that kept the castle community functioning. The seasonal rhythms that shaped castle life created a complex calendar of activities that required extraordinary organizational skills to coordinate effectively. Spring wasn't just about planting crops. It was about mobilizing hundreds of workers for construction projects, organizing diplomatic missions that had been postponed during winter months, and preparing for the military campaigns that determined political relationships throughout the region. Summer brought its own unique challenges and opportunities. The longer daylight hours enabled extended work periods, but they also created demands for increased food production, expanded trade activities, and the intensive social season when noble families visited each other to arrange marriages, negotiate alliances, and maintain the personal relationships that underpinned medieval political structures. Autumn required logistical coordination that would challenge modern event planners. The harvest season meant mobilizing every available worker for agricultural activities while simultaneously preparing the castle for winter isolation. Food preservation activities reached peak intensity, with specialized workers processing enormous quantities of meat, grain, and vegetables using techniques that had to preserve food for months without spoilage. Winter transformed the castle into something resembling a small city under siege, with travel limited by weather and most outdoor work suspended. The population swelled as people sought employment and shelter within the walls, creating overcrowded conditions that tested every system the castle had developed for managing large groups of people. This was when the castle's social and cultural activities reached their peak, with long evenings of storytelling, music, and crafts providing both entertainment and education for community members who couldn't engage in outdoor work. The religious calendar added another layer of complexity to castle life, with major festivals requiring weeks of preparation and creating demands for specialized foods, decorations, and entertainment that strained the castle's resources, while also providing crucial opportunities for community bonding and cultural expression. But it was the unpredictable events, military threats, epidemic diseases, natural disasters, and political upheavals that truly tested the resilience and adaptability of castle communities. The ability to rapidly reorganize activities, mobilize resources, and maintain morale during crisis situations required leadership skills and community cooperation that were developed through years of shared experience and mutual dependence. The castle's response to military threats reveals sophisticated understanding of both defensive strategy and community psychology. When enemy forces threatened the region, the castle didn't just raise drawbridges and wait. It implemented comprehensive plans that included evacuating valuable resources, organizing refugee populations, and maintaining the complex logistics required to sustain siege conditions that could last for months. Every morning, the castle steward reviews a mental ledger that would challenge a modern accountant. How much grain is stored in the granaries? Which fields are ready for harvest? Are the village blacksmiths keeping up with demand for agricultural tools? The Lord's wealth isn't measured in gold coins. It's measured in productive land, skilled workers, and the complex web of obligations and privileges that keep the entire system functioning. The kitchen alone represents an economic operation that would impress any modern restaurant manager. The head cook, Master Edwin, must feed up to 200 people twice a day with no refrigeration, no reliable food preservation beyond salting and smoking, and no guarantee that supply wagons will arrive on schedule. He maintains relationships with hunters, fishermen, and farmers across the region, balancing the Lord's taste for luxury foods like swan and peacock, with the practical need to keep everyone fed on a budget that's always tighter than it appears. But it's the castle's role as an information hub that truly surprises you. Every traveller who passes through carries news, rumours, and intelligence that gets carefully evaluated and shared throughout the network. The Lord's decisions about everything from crop rotation to military alliances depend on information gathered from merchants, pilgrims, and visiting nobles. Margaret, seemingly just a seamstress, actually functions as one of the castle's most important intelligence officers, because women talk more freely around her than they do around male officials. The castle's economic reach extends far beyond its walls. The Lord's authority over local markets means he influences prices, trade routes, and even which goods are available in villages throughout the region. When he decides to build a new wall, the economic impact ripples through dozens of communities as stone cutters, carpenters, and labourers are hired from across the countryside. The castle isn't just a fortress, it's an economic engine that drives prosperity or poverty for thousands of people. Trade relationships are intensely personal. The Lord doesn't just buy goods from merchants. He develops decades-long relationships based on trust, mutual benefit, and shared risk. When your wool shipments are delayed by bandits, the Lord might advance payment to keep your business afloat, knowing that your success ensures his access to quality goods. These aren't cold commercial transactions. They're personal relationships that often become friendships spanning generations. The castle's workshops produce far more than just military equipment. The blacksmith creates agricultural tools, kitchen utensils, and decorative items that are traded throughout the region. The carpenter builds everything from furniture to siege engines, and his apprentices learn skills that will make them valuable workers in communities hundreds of miles away. The castle functions as a combination factory, training centre, and distribution hub for the entire regional economy. Most surprisingly, the economic system depends heavily on women's work that's often invisible to outside observers. The lady of the castle doesn't just manage household servants. She oversees textile production, food preservation, and medical care that represents a huge portion of the castle's economic value. Margaret and women like her don't just sew clothes. They create trade goods, maintain the castle's most valuable possessions, and provide services that would otherwise require expensive outside specialists. The castle's cultural influence extends far beyond its military and economic functions. This is where stories are born, where travelling performers debut new songs, and where the artistic traditions of the region are preserved and developed. The Great Hall isn't just a dining room, it's a theatre, concert hall, and cultural centre that shapes the artistic life of the entire region. Brother Francis has created something remarkable in his small library, working with scribes and visiting scholars. He's assembled a collection of texts that includes not just religious works, but also classical literature, scientific treatises, and practical manuals that make the castle a centre of learning. Young nobles from across the region come here not just to learn manners, but to gain access to knowledge that's unavailable anywhere else for hundreds of miles. The castle's influence on regional traditions is profound. The annual feast celebrating the harvest isn't just a party. It's a cultural event that brings together hundreds of people from dozens of villages to share food, stories, and artistic performances. The Lord's patronage of traveling musicians and storytellers means that new songs and tales spread throughout the region, carrying news, entertainment, and cultural values that help bind the community together. What you discover in the castle's archives is that this fortress has been the birthplace of innovations that have changed life across medieval Europe. The improved plough design that's revolutionizing agriculture in the region was developed here by a collaboration between the castle's blacksmith and a visiting scholar. The new techniques for preserving food that allow the castle to maintain larger populations through winter were perfected in Margaret's workshop and have been copied by castles across the kingdom. The castle's role in preserving knowledge becomes clear when you see Brother Francis working with visiting scholars to copy and illuminate manuscripts. This isn't just decorative work. It's the medieval equivalent of running a printing press and library combined. The books created here will travel to other castles, monasteries, and centers of learning, spreading knowledge that might otherwise be lost forever. The artistic workshops within the castle walls produce work that influences culture far beyond the immediate region. The tapestries created here don't just decorate walls, they tell stories, preserve historical memories, and create visual narratives that help people understand their place in the world. The castle's craftsmen aren't just skilled workers. They're artists whose work shapes how people think about beauty, status, and meaning. The castle's influence on regional literature is particularly fascinating. The songs and stories that emerge from feast hall gatherings don't stay within these walls. They travel with visitors and servants to other communities, evolving and changing as they spread. The romantic tales of courtly love that we associate with medieval culture were often born in settings like this, where skilled storytellers developed narratives that captured the imagination of audiences across social classes. Most surprisingly, the castle serves as a center for technological innovation. The combination of skilled craftsmen, educated advisors like Brother Francis, and practical problems that demand creative solutions has led to improvements in everything from military engineering to agricultural techniques. The castle's workshops function as medieval research and development centers where theoretical knowledge meets practical application. The rhythm of castle life is shaped by forces that extend far beyond its walls. The changing seasons don't just affect the weather. They determine everything from the Lord's military obligations to the availability of food, the scheduling of religious festivals, and the economic opportunities available to the castle's inhabitants. Winter transforms the castle into something resembling a small city under siege. With travel limited by weather and most agricultural work suspended, the population swells as people seek shelter and employment within the walls. The Great Hall becomes a combination workshop, social center, and refugee camp as families crowd together around the central fire. This is when Margaret's textile workshops reach peak production, when Brother Francis conducts his most intensive teaching sessions, and when the castle's storytellers earn their keep with long evenings of entertainment. The approach of spring brings a different kind of energy. The Lord's military obligations require him to prepare for potential conflicts. while the steward organizes the massive logistical effort required to support agricultural work across the region. The castle's blacksmith works overtime producing and repairing agricultural tools, while the stables prepare for the intense travel season that lies ahead. Young people who have spent the winter learning skills within the castle walls begin to disperse back to their home communities, carrying knowledge and connections that will influence the region for years to come. Religious festivals create their own rhythms within castle life. Easter doesn't just mean church services. It means weeks of preparation, massive influxes of visitors, and complex negotiations with other noble families about everything from marriage alliances to trade agreements. The castle's kitchen staff faces challenges that would defeat modern caterers, while Margaret's workshop produces the special clothing and decorations that mark the season's significance. The most disruptive force of all is war. When conflicts arise, the castle's entire purpose shifts from community center to military headquarters. The Great Hall becomes a war room where strategic decisions are made, while the courtyard fills with soldiers, weapons, and the supplies needed to sustain a siege. The normal social relationships that define castle life don't disappear, but they are complicated by the presence of professional warriors whose primary loyalty is to military success rather than community harmony. Political changes beyond the castle's walls can transform life within them overnight. When the Lord's political alliances shift, servants who've worked in the castle for decades might find themselves unwelcome, while new arrivals bring different expectations and customs. The castle's economic relationships can be disrupted by changes in royal policy, while military obligations might require the Lord to spend months away from home, leaving the entire community under the management of people who weren't trained for such responsibility. The legal complexities of medieval life create constant challenges for castle inhabitants. Property disputes, inheritance questions, and criminal matters all require the Lord's attention, while the steward must navigate a complex web of local customs, royal law, and practical necessities that often conflict with each other. The castle serves as a courthouse, mediation center, and enforcement agency for a legal system that's far more complex than most people realize. The people who actually run the castle develop skills and knowledge that would be impressive in any era. The steward must be part accountant, part diplomat, part military strategist, and part social worker. He manages relationships with dozens of suppliers, oversees the work of hundreds of people, and makes decisions that affect the welfare of entire communities. This isn't a job for someone who simply inherited authority. It requires competence, intelligence, and an understanding of human nature that comes from years of experience. Meet Robert, the current steward, who started as a page at age 12 and worked his way up through 20 years of proving himself indispensable. He can calculate grain requirements for winter storage in his head, negotiate with merchants in 3 different languages, and settle disputes between servants before they escalate into violence. His day starts before dawn, reviewing supply inventories, and ends after midnight mediating conflicts that could destabilize the entire community if handled poorly. Robert's mental ledger would astound modern business managers. He tracks the productivity of 40 different farms, monitors the health and morale of 150 castle inhabitants, and maintains diplomatic relationships with stewards from dozens of other castles. When plague threatens the region, he implements quarantine procedures. When harvest fails, he negotiates emergency food purchases. When the Lord's political alliances shift, He quietly reshuffles staff assignments to prevent conflicts that could tear the community apart. Master Edwin, the head cook, represents a different kind of expertise entirely. His knowledge of food preservation, nutrition, and large-scale cooking makes him one of the castle's most valuable inhabitants. He understands the chemistry of fermentation, the economics of food purchasing, and the social dynamics of feeding people from different social classes who all have different dietary restrictions and preferences. His kitchen isn't just a place where food is prepared. It's a complex operation that combines elements of chemistry, engineering, and social psychology. Edwin's daily challenges would defeat most modern restaurant managers. He must prepare 2 full meals for up to 200 people using only wood fires, with no refrigeration, and often with ingredients that arrived weeks ago and may or may not still be edible. His staff includes everyone from skilled sauce makers to children whose job is turning spit over the fire for hours at a time. The logistics alone are staggering, coordinating the slaughter and preparation of livestock, managing the smokehouses where meat is preserved, and timing everything so that hot food arrives in the Great Hall at precisely the right moment. But Edwin's real genius lies in his ability to stretch resources without anyone realizing they're eating survival rations. When unexpected guests arrive, he can transform a modest meal for 50 into a feast for 75 through techniques that modern chefs would recognize as molecular gastronomy. He knows exactly how much sawdust can be mixed into bread without affecting taste, how to make old meat palatable through strategic use of spices, and how to create the illusion of abundance, even when supplies are running dangerously low. The castle's master builder, Master Hugh, brings knowledge that spans multiple disciplines when construction projects are underway. He understands structural engineering, materials science, and project management, while also serving as an artist who creates buildings that are both functional and beautiful. His work requires collaboration with stonecutters, carpenters, and metal workers, while also demanding the diplomatic skills needed to coordinate with the Lord's financial advisors and military strategists. Hugh's current project, reinforcing the castle's eastern wall, demonstrates the complexity of medieval construction management. He's coordinating the work of 30 craftsmen, managing relationships with quarries that supply stone, and solving engineering problems that wouldn't be out of place in modern construction projects. The new wall must be strong enough to withstand siege engines, beautiful enough to reflect the Lord's status, and practical enough to include improved garderobe facilities that won't contaminate the well water. But Hugh's most challenging job isn't technical, it's human. Construction projects disrupt the entire castle community, creating noise, dust, and logistical nightmares that affect everyone from the Lord's family to the kitchen servants. Hugh must balance construction schedules with social harmony, ensuring that his workers don't interfere with the castle's daily operations, while also maintaining the morale of craftsmen who are working in difficult and sometimes dangerous conditions. The women who run the castle's domestic operations develop perhaps the most comprehensive skill sets of all. Lady Eleanor, the Lord's wife, must be part CEO, part diplomat, part medical professional, and part educator. She manages budgets that would challenge modern accountants, oversees medical care that combines practical nursing with primitive surgery, and maintains social relationships that are crucial to the castle's political and economic survival. Eleanor's typical day begins at dawn with a review of household accounts that would impress any modern business executive. She tracks expenses for everything from candle wax to horse feed, monitors the productivity of textile workshops, and makes purchasing decisions that affect the castle's financial stability. But she's also the castle's primary diplomat, maintaining correspondence with noble women across the region who can influence everything from trade agreements to marriage alliances for the castle's children. Her medical responsibilities are equally demanding. Eleanor has trained with Brother Francis to perform basic surgery, set broken bones, and treat diseases that range from common fevers to plague symptoms. She maintains the castle's medicine supplies, knows which herbs treat which conditions, and often serves as the primary medical authority when Brother Francis is unavailable. Her chambers include a fully equipped medical kit that would be recognizable to modern nurses. But it's Margaret, the head seamstress, who truly demonstrates the complexity of women's roles in castle management. Her workshop isn't just a place where clothes are sewn. It's a production facility that creates trade goods worth more than most people's annual income. The tapestries, clothing, and household linens produced under Margaret's supervision represent a significant portion of the castle's economic output, while also serving crucial diplomatic functions as gifts and status symbols. Margaret's expertise extends far beyond needlework. She's an expert in textile chemistry, understanding how different dyes react with various fabrics, and how to create colors that will remain vibrant for decades. She's also a logistics manager, coordinating the delivery of raw materials from across the region and managing a workforce that includes everyone from master embroiderers to children learning basic stitching techniques. The knowledge maintained within castle walls often spans generations, creating institutional memory that enables the community to survive challenges that would destroy less experienced groups. The blacksmith's family has worked in this castle for 4 generations, accumulating knowledge about metallurgy that allows them to create tools and weapons superior to anything available elsewhere in the region. Their understanding of ironworking, steel tempering, and alloy creation represents centuries of accumulated expertise that can't be learned from books. Similarly, the castle's agricultural advisors come from families that have managed these lands for generations. They understand soil conditions, weather patterns, and crop rotation techniques that maximize yields while maintaining long-term soil health. Their knowledge enables the castle to support much larger populations than would be possible with less sophisticated farming techniques. The informal education system within the castle ensures that crucial knowledge is preserved and transmitted to new generations. Young people don't just learn their trade skills, they absorb the complex social knowledge that enables the community to function effectively. They learn how to read the subtle signs that indicate political tensions, how to manage relationships between people from different social backgrounds, and how to maintain the delicate balance between individual ambition and community welfare that keeps the entire system functioning. Even the castle's entertainment serves educational functions that extend far beyond simple amusement. The songs performed by traveling minstrels don't just provide pleasure. They carry news, preserve historical memories, and transmit cultural values that help maintain social cohesion across the region. The stories told during long winter evenings aren't just entertainment. They're educational tools that teach moral lessons, preserve technical knowledge, and maintain the cultural traditions that give meaning to community life. The castle's library, small as it is, represents a concentration of knowledge that makes it a center of learning for the entire region. Brother Francis has collected texts on medicine, agriculture, engineering, and natural philosophy that are consulted by visitors from hundreds of miles away. The knowledge preserved here has prevented famines, cured diseases, and solved technical problems that have improved life for thousands of people throughout the region. What emerges from this complex medieval world is a story that's both more harsh and more human than the romantic tales would suggest. These weren't fairy tale characters living in a fantasy world. They were real people, facing real challenges with intelligence, creativity, and remarkable resilience. The castle walls that protected them from external threats also created a community where people from different backgrounds were forced to cooperate, innovate, and build relationships that often transcended the social boundaries that supposedly defined medieval life. The daily reality of survival within these walls created bonds that modern people might find difficult to understand. When plague threatened the region, social distinctions became meaningless, as everyone worked together to implement quarantine procedures and care for the sick. When harvest failed and food supplies ran low, the Lord's family ate the same survival rations as their servants, and everyone contributed whatever skills they possessed to help the community survive. The most remarkable aspect of castle life isn't the feudal hierarchy that dominated political relationships. It's the practical democracy that emerged from shared challenges and mutual dependence. When the castle's well became contaminated, input was sought from everyone who had relevant knowledge, regardless of their social status. When military threats required defensive preparations, the opinions of experienced soldiers carried more weight than the theoretical knowledge of noble-born officers who lacked practical experience. Children growing up within castle walls developed a sophisticated understanding of human nature that served them well throughout their lives. They learned to read the subtle social cues that indicated tension between different groups, to navigate complex relationships between people with competing interests, and to contribute to community welfare while pursuing their own advancement. These weren't sheltered aristocrats. They were practical people who understood how to build and maintain the relationships that make civilization possible. The women of the castle, in particular, developed skills that would be impressive in any era. They had to be diplomats who could diffuse conflicts before they escalated into violence. Economists who could manage complex budgets and trade relationships. Medical professionals who could treat everything from common injuries to epidemic diseases. And educators who could prepare children for adult responsibilities in a dangerous world. Their contributions to castle life were far more significant than the romantic literature suggests, and their influence on political and economic decisions was often decisive. The religious life of the castle wasn't separate from its practical concerns. It was deeply integrated into every aspect of daily operations. Brother Francis didn't just conduct church services and provide spiritual guidance. His religious education had given him the literacy and analytical skills that made him the castle's primary technical advisor. His understanding of astronomy helped with agricultural planning. His knowledge of herbal medicine saved lives during epidemics. And his ability to read and write made him crucial to diplomatic correspondence and record-keeping. The castle's approach to education was remarkably practical and comprehensive. Children learned not just the basic skills they would need for their adult roles, but also the broader knowledge that would help them adapt to changing circumstances. They studied mathematics, not just for its own sake, but because they would need to calculate food supplies, construction materials, and trade agreements. They learned about geography, not just from books, but from travelers who could describe distant lands and different customs. The technological innovation that emerged from castle workshops often resulted from creative collaboration between people with different types of expertise. The improved plough design that revolutionized regional agriculture came from conversations between the castle's blacksmith, who understood metallurgy, and visiting farmers, who understood soil conditions. The new techniques for food preservation that enabled larger populations to survive winter emerged from experiments conducted by kitchen staff who had both practical experience and access to written knowledge about chemistry and biology. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of a castle life was the way these communities maintained their humanity despite living under constant threats of violence, disease, and starvation. They created art that expressed hope and beauty, maintained traditions that gave meaning to their struggles, and built relationships that provided emotional support during the darkest times. The Great Hall wasn't just a place where food was consumed. It was a space where people came together to share stories, celebrate achievements, and find strength in community solidarity. The economic innovations developed within castle walls often had impacts that extended far beyond the immediate region. The trade relationships, established by castle merchants, created networks that connected distant communities, enabling the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies that improved life across medieval Europe. The agricultural techniques perfected on castle lands were copied by farmers throughout the continent, increasing food production and supporting larger populations. The legal and administrative systems developed to manage castle communities became models for governance that influenced political development across medieval society. The practical solutions worked out for resolving disputes, managing resources, and coordinating complex group activities provided precedents that were adopted by other communities facing similar challenges. The castle wasn't just a military fortress. It was a laboratory where new forms of social organization were developed and tested. The most profound lesson from life inside medieval castles isn't about the past. It's about the timeless human capacity to create meaning, beauty, and genuine community, even under the most challenging circumstances. These people built something remarkable within stone walls designed for war. A society where skilled work was valued, where knowledge was preserved and shared, where children could learn and grow, and where people from different backgrounds could find common ground in their shared humanity. The castle's inhabitants understood something that modern people sometimes forget: that true security comes not from walls and weapons, but from the relationships and knowledge that enable communities to flourish even in the face of adversity. They created systems of mutual support that ensured everyone's survival, developed practical skills that solved real problems, and maintained cultural traditions that gave their lives meaning beyond mere survival. The technological achievements that emerged from castle workshops demonstrate what human creativity can accomplish when practical necessity meets accumulated knowledge. The engineering solutions developed for castle construction influenced building techniques across Europe. The agricultural innovations perfected on castle lands increased food production and supported larger populations. The military technologies created for castle defense changed the nature of warfare and political power. But the most lasting contributions of castle communities weren't technological. They were social and cultural. The educational systems that prepared children for adult responsibilities, the legal frameworks that resolved disputes fairly, the economic arrangements that balanced individual ambition with community welfare, and the cultural traditions that preserved knowledge and values, all provided foundations for the development of modern civilization. The artistic achievements of castle communities reflect a sophisticated understanding of beauty, meaning, and human psychology. The tapestries created in castle workshops weren't just decorative objects. They were visual narratives that preserved historical memories, expressed cultural values, and created shared identities that bound communities together. The songs and stories that emerged from castle halls provided entertainment, education, and emotional support that helped people cope with the challenges of medieval life. The medical knowledge preserved and developed within castle walls saved countless lives and provided the foundation for later advances in healthcare. The combination of practical nursing experience, herbal medicine, and surgical techniques available in castle infirmaries was often superior to medical care available in major cities. The understanding of disease prevention, nutrition, and public health developed through managing large castle populations contributed to improvements in health and longevity across medieval society. In the end, the medieval castle reveals itself as something far more complex and inspiring than either the romantic fairy tale or the grim fortress of popular imagination. It was a place where people of different backgrounds came together to solve problems, create beauty, and build something larger than themselves. The lessons of their success, the importance of practical skills, the value of cooperation, the power of knowledge, and the resilience of human community remain as relevant today as they were 7 centuries ago. Standing in that great hall, surrounded by the noise and warmth of a community that has survived plague, war, and countless other challenges, you realize that these people have something that modern life often lacks: the deep satisfaction that comes from being truly needed, the security that comes from genuine community, and the knowledge that their work contributes to something meaningful and enduring. If you enjoyed this journey through history and found yourself drifting peacefully into the world of medieval castles, please consider subscribing to our channel. We explore the hidden stories behind history's most fascinating places, bringing you the sights, sounds, and experiences that made our ancestors human, just like us. Sweet dreams, and thank you for joining us in discovering what really happened inside these remarkable stone communities.